Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Siju. Coming up in this edition, the United Nations is calling for an investigation into a deadly Israeli airstrike near the Rafik Hariri University Hospital in Beirut. The International Monetary Fund maintains its global growth forecast in 2024 at 3.2%. And Chinese President Xi Jinping meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Kazan before attending a BRICS leaders meeting. We begin in the Middle East. The United Nations is calling for a quick investigation into an Israeli airstrike that killed 18 people, including 4 children. The attack near the Rafik Hariri University Hospital in Beirut also wounded 60 others. Jeremy Lawrence from the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says hospitals, ambulances and medical personnel are specifically protected under international humanitarian law.
The hospital itself, which serves as one of the main hospitals in Beirut and has received a large number of patients throughout the conflict, also appears to have been damaged in the strike. In the conduct of military operations, all feasible precautions must be taken to avoid and, in any event, to minimise incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects.
Lebanon is calling for the health sector to be protected following the Israeli strike near the hospital in southern Beirut. Yasser Hakim tells us about the intensifying Israeli attacks.
Every night is actually worse than the one before as these strikes intensify here, especially in Beirut. And Rafik Hariri Hospital, 18 deaths there. It's a state-owned hospital in an area that does not belong to Hezbollah. The people there do not belong to Hezbollah at all. The Ministry of Health is just beside the hospital. The UN headquarters is on the other side of the hospital. So it's a neighborhood that really does not really relate to Hezbollah at all. At the same time, a press conference was held by the speaker of Hezbollah. He promoted the idea that Hezbollah is still strong and that they are continuing their attacks on Israel and they will continue until they are victorious. He gave examples of how the rockets have reached Tel Aviv and Haifa several times, causing a lot of casualties in Israel. He also, for the first time, claimed responsibility for the attack on Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence. Now, there was no official claim responsibility before, but Hezbollah said that we were the ones who initiated that attack on the Israeli Prime Minister's residence, showing that we have the capability as Hezbollah to reach his home and any other official. He also said that they have mandated Nabih Berri, the Lebanese parliament speaker, to be the one who would be negotiating on behalf of Hezbollah from now on. So negotiations, he met with Oxin Nabih Berri and he received the proposal from the US, which includes Israeli conditions to the ceasefire. And as you understand also that was rejected by Hezbollah and Nabih Berri, and they are planning to give their conditions and what they want from the ceasefire, especially the 1701 resolution and the UNIFIL mission.
That was Yasser Hakim reporting. The fighting in Lebanon has displaced about 1/4 of the population, more than 1.2 million people, as Israel continues its military campaign against Hezbollah. Thousands of displaced people fled through neighboring Syria to Iraq, which has opened its borders to help. Stuart Smith reports.
By air and by road, displaced residents of Lebanon are seeking safety in a country itself grappling with the aftermath of war. For 7 years, since defeating ISIS, Iraq has been at peace. Now Lebanese residents are finding a place of refuge here, near the ancient city of Babylon. The region's capital, Hilla, has taken in over 400 people. Around 2/3 of them are women and children.
The
moment we entered Iraq, all of life's necessities were secured without us asking. We came without knowing all this would be available. A house, electricity, water, even simple things like kids' toys, even things like that which are not important, they supplied us with.
Many have chosen to stay with friends and family, but for those without anyone here to help, the government and local agencies have stepped in to provide accommodation, provisions and support.
We were displaced from our country after heavy bombing. We left our families, cars and businesses and went to Iraq. Thank God we were received very well. It was very difficult for us. We spent 2 days on the road with very little rest. It was hot and tiring and difficult.
The reception has been warm right across the country. Last week, refugee children began attending Iraqi schools, while Hilla is building residential complexes for 180 more families. Iraq's Interior Ministry isn't developing plans for long-term resettlement, nor, unlike previous regional wars, is it considering setting up refugee camps. For those still trying to leave, efforts have been hampered by Israel bombing the only road out in all of southern Lebanon, making the route impossible to travel by vehicle and treacherous by foot. Israel says the Masna crossing was being used to smuggle weapons from Syria into Lebanon, but the destroyed road means for those still trying to leave, who can't afford a flight out or make the journey to Lebanon's far north, getting to safe places abroad like Iraq is now even harder.
That was Stuart Smith. In Europe, Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin ahead of the BRICS leaders' meeting in Kazan. President Xi called for more efforts to align the Belt and Road Initiative with the Eurasian Economic Union to support high-quality economic development. He described the BRICS framework as the world's most important platform for solidarity and cooperation between emerging markets and developing countries. Huang Fei has more.
During his meeting with President Putin, President Xi expressed a great delight in coming to the ancient city of Kazan, which is part of the ancient tea trade route that connected China with Russia, that brought Chinese tea to many Russian households. And now fast forward to 400 years, the two countries are expanding what they call a all-round practical cooperation. And this is especially important in what President Xi describes as a fast-changing and turbulent world. He said that the lasting and profound friendship between China and Russia will not change, nor will their responsibility for the world and for the people. President Xi also mentioned that BRICS is the world's most important platform for solidarity and cooperation between emerging markets and developing nations. During BRICS, President Xi will want to have more in-depth conversations with not only Mr. Putin, but also many other world leaders present at the summit.
That was Huang Fei on the meeting between the Chinese and Russian presidents in Kazan. Moving to North America, the International Monetary Fund has maintained its global growth forecast in 2024 at 3.2%, consistent with its projection in July. The IMF noted the high level of uncertainty in the world economy in its latest World Economic Outlook. The report also said further intensification of geopolitical rifts could weigh on trade, investment, and the free flow of ideas. Owen Fairclough spoke to IMF economists and officials to find out more.
The International Monetary Fund revising growth forecasts upwards for some of the world's major economies should be cause for celebration. But at the annual meetings the IMF hosts with the World Bank, there's caution.
What risks are the ones that we think are the most relevant? Well, geopolitical tensions, fragmentation, leading to increased tariffs, leading to potentially spikes in commodity prices related to what might be happening in the Middle East. That certainly would be something that could add inflationary pressures, weaken activity, so not a good development.
If the Eurozone, Japan and Mexico are struggling, the likes of Brazil, India, the United States and the United Kingdom have so far weathered all of those risks to enjoy either stronger growth forecasts or no change compared to the IMF's last assessment in July. Experts gathered in Washington, D.C. are urging central banks who've largely tamed inflation to now stimulate growth by cutting interest rates previously raised to drive down prices.
We have three main policy recommendations. One relates to monetary policy for central banks to pivot towards providing more support to activity where inflation is under control.
Other IMF recommendations include cutting public debt through taxation without stifling growth while maintaining that growth with a steady labour supply. But both of those will be problematic for Donald Trump if he wins the US presidential election in 2 weeks' time. While the IMF has praised the US for the impact of foreign-born workers on the economy, Trump wants to restrict immigration. And government accountants have warned that tax cuts proposed by both Trump and opponent Kamala Harris would add trillions of dollars to the public debt.
That is Owen Fairclough on the IMF's latest World Economic Outlook. Now to the US presidential election. Michigan promises to be another tight contest. Just 154,000 votes separated Democrat Joe Biden and Republican Donald Trump in 2020. Dan Williams traveled to the state to find out what's on voters' minds ahead of Election Day.
Just north of the Indiana-Michigan border, in the town of Jones, Darrell Griner, a fifth-generation soybean and corn farmer, is preparing for another day of harvesting.
We've had some pretty high irrigation bills and that, so that another cost.
Griner, like many US farmers, is struggling with corn and soybean commodity prices hitting record lows.
Right now we're not even at production cost, so that's a big problem right now.
With the presidential election fast approaching, whoever wins, Griner wants there to be more focus on the future of agriculture.
I've listened to both candidates a little bit. I've never heard them say anything about agriculture. We need to have a stability. We need to be able to get paid just like everybody else does. We don't get to name our price for our corn.
Across large swathes of rural Michigan, support for Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump is clear to see. But it's a different story in Redford, on the outskirts of Detroit. Harrison Shelby is a local community organizer and activist in the area. Although he believes African Americans will vote in big numbers for Democrat Kamala Harris, he would like to see more attention focused on black communities.
African American community wants to have their vote earned and be respected. I think the party really has to rebuild that relationship, and it starts by listening to the needs of our community.
In 2016, Donald Trump became the first Republican to win Michigan in 28 years. That was thanks largely to overwhelming support in rural areas and reduced Democratic turnout in traditional strongholds such as Detroit. And although Joe Biden managed to flip Michigan back to the Democrats last time out, this presidential election once again promises to be a tight race.
The Arab American community could also have a key say. Many Arab and Muslim Americans are angry over the Biden administration's support of Israel's response to the October 7th attacks by Hamas. Its offensive in Gaza has led to mass civilian casualties and suffering. There are some 200,000 registered Muslim voters in Michigan, enough to swing the state. Then there's the wild card potential. There are a handful of third-party candidates on the ballot, and while none has any real chance of winning, any votes they score are votes taken away from the top contenders, potentially swaying the election.
That was Dan Williams in Michigan, ahead of the US general elections. Finally, in Asia, China's Shenzhou 19 spacecraft is at the launch site waiting for the green light for its mission. It will send a crew to the Tiangong space station from northwestern China. Sun Ye reports.
The Shenzhou 19 spacecraft and its Long March 2F carrier rocket has been transported to the launch area here at the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. And this means the Shenzhou 19 mission is going to take off in the coming days. Now, space engineers here say the rocket is now in good condition and it will go through more checkups and launch drills in the coming days. That's before the Shenzhou 19 mission actually starts. And when the Shenzhou 19 crew takes off from here, they are going to meet up and sort of go through a change of guard process with the current Shenzhou 18 crew who are now in the Tiangong space station. We expect a modest change of guard ceremony taking place in orbit in the coming days too. Now, the Shenzhou 18 crew, they had started their space journey here at the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center around 6 months ago. And by now, the Shenzhou 18 crew's commander, Ye Guangfu. He has now clocked over 360 days in space, and he is expected and set to become China's first taikonaut to spend over a year in space.
That was Sun Ye on China's latest manned space mission. Now, recapping the headlines, the United Nations is calling for an investigation into a deadly Israeli airstrike near the Rafik Hariri University Hospital. The International Monetary Fund has maintained its global growth forecast for 2024 at 3.2%. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Kazan before attending BRICS meetings. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics and business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thanks for listening.